Hi there. This is Michael Becker, and welcome to this week's Tinderbox lesson. And with me today is Anthony Caldwell. He's the Assistant Director at UCLA's Digital Research Consortium and manager of the Resident Technologists Scholarly Innovations Lab. So, Anthony, welcome, and thank you very much for taking the time with us.
Thank you. I'm more than happy to be here, and hopefully I can share some of the work I do with Tinderbox.
Absolutely. So, before we get into that, just really quickly, because we want to get into the Tinderbox toys, what do you do, and how did you discover Tinderbox, and
Okay.
what need is it fulfilling?
Okay. So aside from the title that was just read, basically I work in the humanities and with the humanities department at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. In particular, the digital humanities, and I also work with the library, and I run a unit that facilitates research for faculty and students, and I also perform my own research in parallel. And so, as a resident technologist, what that means is that when we have faculty and students come into the Scholarly Innovation Lab, when we're back in the real world, now they do it via Zoom, of course, then what I would do is assist them with research, and that might be learning new tools, that could be pointing them in different directions, that could be working through ideas or problems to kind of better define their research projects. And so I've been doing that for about 3.5 years. And before that, I worked in the architecture department at UCLA, and that's actually my background. I was trained as an architect. And my almost all the work I do on my own research is three-dimensional visualizations and modeling and reconstructions, usually of lost or being lost in the process of being lost buildings.
Oh, very cool. And okay. And how'd you discover Tinderbox, and why, and what purpose does it serve for you?
I have heard about Tinderbox probably since it first appeared, but it was always tantalizing to me, but I could never quite figure out enough about it from at that point on the web. The web isn't quite like today. Back then it was, you didn't have a lot of YouTube material, so you had to kind of read through a lot of material to figure out what something was. But about I think 4 years ago or so, there was a sale, and it was greatly reduced in cost. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna get this and give this a try because it really looks interesting.
Yep.
And then it sat for another year as I tried to figure it out. And then a few years ago, I actually had a couple of projects, and I pushed myself to get into it. And at that point, it opened a lot of doors for me in my type of research. So I would not describe myself by any means probably the most sophisticated Tinderbox user. However, for what I need it for, it actually fills the need greatly. So I work with a lot of databases, a lot of structure. A lot of the current research I'm doing is actually on the historic theaters in downtown Los Angeles. And there's some of them, most of them are still standing. There's a fair amount of material available on the Internet Archive in the way of postcards, books, you name it. There's a lot of material that has to be covered. But what I needed Tinderbox for, or I should say what the niche was that it ended up filling for me, is as I start to research a building or a structure, I begin to learn about the life of it. So who was the architect? That's kind of the obvious one. Who were the owners? What was the purpose? But as you start to dig into it, you begin to learn that architects and artists and designers actually worked on several buildings, and they had very interesting connections through either professional association, or they might have belonged to a club. There's a very famous club called the Artland Club, which is now gone. It perished before the Great Depression, but it was a very powerful presence in downtown Los Angeles in the 1920s. And a lot of the members of that club worked with each other and on all these projects. And many of the projects are really kind of very sculptural in nature. They're early movie palaces from the 1900 to 1925 era. And so what Tinderbox allowed me to do was, as I began to read through the materials that I had, it allowed me to basically start to create quick connections without a lot of structure. Now, why that's important is that when I start to delve into research rather relatively deeply, I may not know where it's going. I may not know, do I need to know all the architects' firms, for instance, or do I need to know, what do I need to know? And so what I wanted was a tool that would allow me, as I learned new details, to just simply put it down and connect it to other details without worrying about, and that's where I think it's really strong.
Yeah, I really liked what you said there. I mean, my view on that too is, so what, I like you and like many of us is, Tinderbox has always been that tantalizing. I know it will work for me. I just can't get it to work. And then I had my epiphany in September. And as you know, I've then created the YouTube videos and such since then. But what really did it for me was I just couldn't stomach doing my industry research once again in Excel. Like, so when you go do market analysis and industry research, typically you focus on doing it in the output, right? So your intention is to come out with this like pretty Excel spreadsheet that shows features and functions and companies, and it's and it's all tightened up. And what modern software has taught us to do is to work in what I call the output software, and you end up getting your ideas and your work ends up getting constrained by the four walls of the output, whether or not it be PowerPoint, Word, or Excel. I'm using the Microsoft suite as an example. And then invariably what I found is, like, especially when I'm analyzing a company, for instance, and particularly that company's products, you start looking for features, and then you start looking for price. And then when you start getting to the next product, you find others. But when by the third or fourth product, you start seeing deviations from the structure. And if those deviations don't easily allow you to manage that two-dimensional aspect that is Excel, invariably what you end up doing is you start getting stressed out because you got to get your job done. And so then you start ignoring the details and letting them just drop on the cutting room floor. Right. And you lose all that effort, right? And so invariably what I found was, and what kind of got me into the hump over the hump with Tinderbox is I just got sick of wasting 85-90% of my research efforts. Whereas, just like what you said, if you're doing that early research and you start just discovering really cool stuff, you don't have to like constrain yourself to whatever initially to the output. You can just dump it in there unstructured, let the structure evolve, and then eventually you can output it into any output you want. And I think that's really one of the most powerful things for me that Tinderbox has really afforded.
No, and I agree. And it's interesting. We're describing the same problem from really different perspectives, which I think is really great how Tinderbox can fill that bridge between different disciplines. For instance, the same idea. Many of the researchers I work with, when they initially start collecting data, I do this too, they will throw it in an Excel spreadsheet. It makes sense. So as you start building out things, and if it's very linear, so if it's, let's say, buildings, which would be my thing, it has a name, it has a year it was constructed, it has an address, it has an architect. There are a lot of things that you can kind of categorize. But then once you get past the basics, and then you start talking about, so the sculptural elements on the facade of this building were done by an artist. And he also did this other building. How did he know, what was the connection between those buildings? Was he just, out selling himself? And as you start to read through these things, you begin to understand that these connections actually occur in multiple places. In one of the things I'll show a little later, one of the artists I'm looking at was actually a jurist in the 1915 Pan Pacific, California exhibit in San Diego, which is now Balboa Park. And this is where I came into contact with a particular style, I'm pretty sure, and it got reproduced onto a theater. So then what happens is when you start learning things like that, then you have to figure out, how does that end up in the spreadsheet, right? What do you call that cell?
What's the column? Yeah.
Right. And so then you start spending a lot of time up late at night trying to figure out, what do I call this? And what do I call that? Did I call it the wrong thing? And then usually what I would discover is that I would settle on an idea that mostly fit for, 90% of the case. But then I hit that 10% that it's not going to fit. And then I have to rethink it. The beauty of Tinderbox is it really doesn't ask me to do that. I can pretty much just flow it out. I try and use, of course, you want to use, common terminology across this, but I'm not blocked. I don't have to keep thinking, is this the right way to categorize at the moment? I'm more concerned about capturing the data and refining it so that I can begin to tell a story.
And that's what Mark Anderson ultimately calls, incremental formalization. Right? That you can just allow the form to come come with you and along the way. And it's just really mind blowing. And then I do want to get into your demo right now real quick. But the one last thing, even for me yesterday when I was doing some work, I find that, I don't know if you remember from the marketing era, there's a gentleman named Marshall McLuhan, 1964. And Marshall McLuhan was a business advertiser and one really philosopher. And his view was, he coined this term, the medium is the message. And what he meant by that was the medium to which you use will influence the message or how that message is received. Likewise, the message, whatever point you're trying to get across will influence the medium. Right, the context of the message, the timing of the message, etc., will make you react differently to that medium, whether or not it's a billboard, an email, a text message, all that. And what I find fascinating with Tinderbox is, if you think about that, the medium is the message. So if you're constructing your work in the output software in the Excel, that medium of Excel will influence your message. Likewise, whether or not it's Word or PowerPoint. And what I find with Tinderbox is I get all of them, right? I get all of the mediums because of the different views. I get all of I can put any messaging I want. I can do it as attributes or text is just another attribute. And then what I find really interesting, and I was just doing it this morning, and I have a bit of dyslexia. So I find that I've got typos and things like that. And it's also too, I just move too fast and I get lazy sometimes. And that's where it comes from too. I don't want to pull it all on that. But what I find really powerful with the Tinderbox capability is all of the information is in one place, right? And then what I can do is I can apply a template and I can have that linear word view and I can read the content that way. Or I can develop a template that gives me essentially that Excel-like grid, and then I can read the content that way. Or I can take snippets, or I can push it to HTML, or I can shove it into a PowerPoint file. And so essentially what Tinderbox allows me to do is it's basically like looking at a tree from every angle without having to replicate the tree. Because the problem when you're managing an output software is you end up making copies of it. And so as you want to as you start getting those insights, or if you start identifying corrections to make, well, where are you going to make the correction? Because it's in 5 different places now. Whereas in Tinderbox, it allows the information to be in one place, viewed through multiple lenses, as opposed to 5 places viewed through independent lenses. And I just find that really powerful.
No, it is. And for me, a lot of times I'll be reading a lot of material and I'll come across a really interesting tidbit. And so I can very quickly grab that and pop it into Tinderbox. And I use DevonThink Pro also with this. And I just create a link back to the original document I was reading through. And so, when I start writing or I start doing a research presentation, I'll think, oh, I remember there was this story. Where is that? And I have a place to go find that, which is something that's actually kind of hard to do in more formal structures, I think. You can do vast searches of information, but actually the kind of little more fuzzy logic kind of approach, like, oh, what was the name of that place? I kind of have like almost the whole sentence that I'm looking for, but I can kind of work through it in Tinderbox pretty easily.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, we can go on to this philosophical or rhetorical conversation forever. Let's jump into your file. Okay, so you've got some stuff to show us. So if you don't mind,
have some stuff to show you.
Sharing your screen and let's see the toys.
Yes, we're going to share the screen and we will share off the toys. Okay. 1 second. And it always takes me a second even though I almost seem organized. So I'm going to kind of describe this backwards with what I'm collecting in a kind of a larger scale, and then how I funnel that into Tinderbox. So we're going to end up at Tinderbox, and we're just going to do a really quick jump as to where this data is coming from, so you get a sense of how I'm using it. So I'm going to share up here. And I start off with Zotero. And so I use Zotero just because I can capture web pages that have lots of entries in them. I use the Internet Archive. I just want to give a quick, then I'll move to the next piece, where I can actually grab, for instance, periodicals. The research I'm doing is architectural in nature, but it also involves theater. So there are these things like, Exhibitor Daily Review. Some of them are actually quite large. These are about 1,000 pages, give or take. And so Zotero is really great about capturing a page. So I can go to the Internet Archive. I can ask for a search. It'll give me a list. I can capture that into Zotero. I then add the PDFs. That's all good. But then the issue is, how do you search it? And so for that, I use DevonThink Pro. And I'm just going to switch over to that.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting. So, like I use Zotero a ton too.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to like spend all this time tagging and stuff in Zotero, right? So you get it into Zotero, and that gets you your styles and your citations and your bibliographies and all of that.
Right.
Then now you're going to show us getting it over into DevonThink.
Well, and the interesting thing is that when I started searching through the PDFs, which is what I actually need to do, you can do that in Zotero. And I keep imagining in my head, there's probably some mystery plugin that I haven't seen or heard of that lets me kind of open the search. So what I mean by that is that if I do a search for, let's say, a name of an architect, it'll show me in Zotero all of the PDFs that was found, but it doesn't show me what it found. I have to then open up the PDF and do the search again to see where it found the individual entries. So it's kind of a little bit of work. Like I said, there's probably a plugin I have missed. That wouldn't be surprising. But I'm going to switch over now to DevonThink. So what I did with DevonThink is there are two modes. If you use DevonThink of looking at files, you can either import files directly, or you can index a directory. And so as it turns out, Zotero basically creates a directory in your home directory, and that is what is being referenced here.
Dude, that is cool.
So now
I'm excited. All right.
Okay, so you know where I'm driving with this,
my
right?
Zotero database is massive. You just answered a huge question for me.
Right. So if you opened up, this is basically the folder. If you opened it up, and you would find a folder called storage, and you would find your PDFs, right?
Yeah.
But they're all indexed. So what DevonThink does is I looked this morning, about 5,000 entries, give or take, in this particular Zotero system that I'm using. That is all the research. It'd be architectural magazines on movie house owners, all sorts of stuff.
I'm so excited. You just solved a massive problem for me. Okay, keep going.
Yep. And so there are two ways you can do this. You could just type a search title in here. I could say, let's see. Let's go with Joe Mora. He happens to be a very famous artist in Los Angeles, an early West artist who I'm actually studying. And this just found me every entry that has Joe. And if I click on this, I get the list on this side of everywhere that it was found. This is a book about him, so it would find a lot of them. But for instance, if I went, this was actually one I found the other day, which is kind of interesting. This is a publication that was put together, I believe, as part of the WPA project, documenting artists in the 1930s. And they actually have an entry about him where he's actually quoted. So I now have a quote from him, and I can find a whole variety of other things. So I can use a direct search up here. I created a couple of smart groups so that I could do the search for me. They're kind of general searches, like find me all the architect and engineer magazines, which I can then open and then search if I want. I was interested in a material called cast stone, which isn't used anymore, but I said, go find me all the cast stones. And of course, this is where it takes a second sometimes. There we go. And it finds me all the references to cast stone. And again, it gives me the search and highlights it. So this solved a huge problem. This allows me to now search a vast quantity of material very quickly and then sort of determine, is this what I'm interested in, an ad, or do I want to know something else about it? So as I start digging through all this, I start finding out things. And so I start highlighting things in DevonThink, and you can annotate, of course. But you can also do a clever thing, which is you can create a page link, which is right here. And then if you're on a Mac, which is probably the only thing you're going to be on with DevonThink, since it doesn't run on a PC, unfortunately, this allows you to copy a link which will go back to the spot in the document. So with that sort of power, then what I do is I go over to my Tinderbox file. Now, I would love to tell you that I'm got all sorts of super brilliant things going on, but actually what I've got going on is...
Let me pause you right there before we move on. So on the, going back to the Zotero file,
Yep.
So a couple things there. So on the Tinderbox forum, what we've been playing with is you can do highlights using annotations in Tinderbox.
Right.
And I actually find the app Highlighter better at highlighting than the PDF files than Tinderbox itself. And the two go back and forth. So any highlights you make in Highlighter automatically gets into Tinderbox.
Yeah.
There is now there's a JavaScript or an Apple script that the community develops and I help refine, where you can then actually convert your Zotero highlights to Markdown, and then import all of those into Tinderbox.
Oh, how great!
Right, so you could have you could be reading a PDF file and have 100 highlights in a particular article, and all of those with 3 clicks can be all imported into Tinderbox.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's, and this is the beauty of Tinderbox, is that you can move the data quickly into
okay.
it.
So what are we seeing here? This is cool.
So this is how I start typically. So I actually kind of, it evolves over time. So this is about the $1 Million Theater, which is in downtown Los Angeles. And actually, when I start these, I use a couple of the built-in prototypes. So I have a person prototype. And then I basically created one here, which was a style prototype. And then I also took this is kind of a hybrid. It's a location or event, because many of the events that I look at were also a location. For instance, the Panama, California Exposition was an event, and it was also a location. So what I do here is I grab some very basic information. So I start with what I call the top level. Wikipedia is always a double-edged sword because it isn't always obviously as accurate. However, it does have what I call breadcrumbs. So in general, I grab the information at the top that Wikipedia has, or whatever the top level. So in the case of an architect, the top level kind of search I would do is a site called PCAD, which is the Pacific Building Database. And it has kind of good information on buildings on the Pacific Coast and also on architects. And so I would probably grab that instead of Wikipedia. But the whole point of this top level is really not it's just the beginning. It's just to get names and places and dates. And then I need to go through and kind of really verify all these things. But in this case, what I'm throwing out quickly is I know that Joe Mora designed the facade elements on the $1 Million Theater in downtown Los Angeles. He was an extremely prolific and amazing artist who was a sculptor. He was actually kind of referred to as the Renaissance man of the West because of all of his capabilities. And so I started digging into his relationship to the $1 Million Theater. It turns out he was a jurist, as I mentioned, at the Panama, California Exposition, 1915. And one of the nice things about the links that I can create here is I tend to give them their own names, but ones that make sense about what is that relationship. So in this case, he served on the International Jury and Awards for. This architect developed the style for, and he also had worked with here, which is another connection I don't have, who also worked with another architect who developed the style. And the style they developed was a California version of this wonderful style, which is derived from the Spanish version, which is derived from an architect in Spain who did this, who actually created the first, what we would call versions of this style for a building. It's extremely decorative. It's related to Baroque. I kind of created some additional attribute fields here. So I have what kind of works for me. I reuse the built-in ones whenever I can, but in some cases, some of the way I need to refer to this isn't there. So I just add them. So they become user attributes. And then what I do, so this is the starting point. And as I start digging, as it grows and evolves, it tends to get bigger and bigger. So now, segue to the current one. Whoops, where is it? Oh, actually, it appeared because I'm sharing the whole app. There we go. So now you should see 2 screens, I think.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to flip to this one. So this is the same thing, only much more extrapolated out. And this now begins to get into some of the tools. I'm going to actually whack this one down since I'm going to spare a few system resources. Okay. So this is essentially the same thing. Now, what I didn't do in this is I did not put an image for these things right at the top of the descriptor. That one does not have one, but this one does. Just because I want for clarity, the images. I've tried playing around with the different colors, with the fonts and different types of overlays, and there are different things you can do to make it more visible. But at this stage, really, I created a badge. So I created some prototypes. So let's look at them real quick. Two types of prototypes. The person prototype is based off the built-in one. I created an event place prototype, a theater prototype, a reference which is based almost entirely off the built-in one, and an organization, which is one. So this could be a club or a fraternal organization or American Institute of Architects, whatever, an organization. And then I created two architectural prototypes. One is for an element and one is for a style element. So the style element can be a style, or it can be something, some element that has a style to it. And then the element can be anything. And the way this plays out in this map is that we have, for instance, this architect, Brainstorm, who designed the office building portion. So this is one of my elements of the Metropolitan Theater. On this side, we have another architect who worked with him. So we have a connection, worked with, and he designed the theater element of the theater itself. And what's interesting.
So can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
You mind? Can you center that real quick? I just want to point out one thing, and we can talk about how to do that later. No, you can come back up, zoom in a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Select the architect on the right.
Okay.
Zoom in there real quick.
Okay.
Okay. Now, can you zoom in a little bit so we can see it a little bit more?
I'm trying to get my
plus. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the point that I want to raise, and I don't think I'm guessing that you're not doing this, but so you see how you have a link type worked with or a link type design. Yep. If you hit Command N or Command 1 real quick for me.
Yep.
And pop up the
Yep.
Okay, and click on the that one right there.
Yep.
Okay, now click on links.
On links.
Links right there. Now. Yep. This is what you can do. Go ahead and click the untitled and select like designed from or designed.
Okay.
Now you can see on the bottom where it says action code. You can type action code in there. So you could say, for example, full name, $full name, parent, $full name destination equals $full name source. So what that would mean is when you do a designed link connection on that action of making that designed link type connection with that note, it would pass this George Edwin Burns name over into the office building note. So you can actually use the action function to pass data back and forth between notes as you make those connections.
Oh, that's very cool. That actually would be helpful.
It's insanely helpful because then later when you're running agents, you can run an agent that's just looking for like, give me everything that this guy designed, and you'll only get like you'll get all of the little purple boxes where his name shows up.
Oh, very cool.
Right. So that's called linked. It's called linked action. And it's something we can show later how to do it, but it's in some of my videos.
Oh, that's great.
It's a wickedly cool thing. And so, like, for example, when I do it for my academic research, I studied I'm studying 31 technology adoption theories since 1956. And there are 150 variables that have been used across all of those theories. So because of Tinderbox, what I was able to do, very similar to what you're doing here, I created a note for every single individual theoretical construct, like ability or social norms, etc., and 31 notes for all the theories. I then can start mapping those variables to each of the theories. And then I can then figure out which theory is using the same variable. Right. And you can let Tinderbox run agents off of that. So you end up finding that in reality, you've got these 31 theories and 150 variables, but in the end of the day, really only about good 20% of the variables are really common to everyone. And the other ones are just like one-offs. So you get some really, really powerful analytics that you can get out of using linked action. We can talk about that later.
Oh, and that's the sort of thing that really I love that drives me on this. So the interesting, that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to talk to you about that some
Yeah,
more.
give me a call later.
Sure.
We'll do we'll do a whole call just on that.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about the $1 Million Theater is that it's got a lot of interesting decorative elements and a lot of story behind it. So as I mentioned in the where I started in the other one, so now we have Joe Mora here, and then he designed decorative elements in this.
One other one, if you don't mind. Go click
Yeah.
on Joe's name again real quick.
Yep.
So it's very cool that you're sticking images in Tinderbox, and that's for the people that are watching too, right? So try to teach at the same time. In that, but the challenge is Tinderbox. What it does is it will rasterize those images into bitmaps, and these files get very big. Right. And so there's actually a way, and I've done this in many of my videos. And again, this might be something you might be interested offline. Is you can use essentially HTML export code.
Oh, link it.
Yeah, put them into the notes and link them to the file in the hard drive. So you're actually so then that file gets pulled, that image gets pulled in, but not actually taking up Tinderbox space, and then is actually used for exports.
I did,
and then you can run and generate reports off of that.
Oh, cool.
And then you can also use attributes to demonstrate, and then you can actually tokenize the path and the directory and the file name for that image. So that file can be kind of anywhere on your hard drive. It doesn't have to be in one place. And then you can manage all of that. So I can show you how to tokenize that later too.
Oh,
but that might be another incremental formalization that you can have in the way you manage images.
No, this is great. Actually, this is better. It's a review of what I'm doing. It's giving me lots of good directions.
All right, let's go. Keep going.
So what's interesting here is that we've got the style that was essentially brought in from the Panama, California exposition here. And again, I have kind of the same representations I had in the other one, but I've kind of played it out more.
So let me pause you real quick, if you don't mind. So how do you go about writing your original content? So you mentioned like you're copying and pasting, descriptions from Wikipedia and other sources. How are you making a distinction between what you originally wrote and is copywritten material of your own versus material you've copied from other people?
So what this is a placeholder for what I'm going to write. And what I write is a fusion of the material that I've learned. Right. So if we dig into Joe for a second, what we're going to find out is that there are actually articles within him, as it were.
You right mouse click on the tab, you can do outline view, and that should help.
Well, yeah. And so I only have the one for him, but this is basically something I pulled out of DevonThink.
Got it.
So this link will take me back to that exact reference and page.
Got it.
So what I'm doing is I'm effectively using the top level as the place to hold all the data. And then what I will do when I start writing is I will go through and I will start synthesizing the pieces and connecting them in my own words and referring to the articles I've found along the way, and then also adding other material. So you're seeing kind of like the very beginning of this. This is about a week old. It's for a presentation I'm going to be giving on the history of actually a theater that's over here. So the trail, what's interesting is I kind of went to the trail backwards when I did my discovery, but Joe Mora is the son of a famous Spanish sculptor, Domingo, who worked on a theory that I'm giving a talk about in about a month, the 1911 Orpheum Theater in Los Angeles. And his father did the decorative elements of that facade, but he passed away before the end of the project. So Joe took over that part of the project. Turns out Joe has a brother who's very famous. The whole family is like deeply involved with art and all sorts of interesting things. And so Joe's brother, F. Lewis Mora, was actually a painter, a very famous painter who did a lot of beautiful work. And he's doing the murals in the building as well. And so when the father passes away, the son's Joe takes over finishing it. And these are kind of different articles that I've found and have been populating it out in various ways so that I can kind of see where all the pieces are. Again, this has also inside of this the difference. And then what I did at the top up here is I created a couple of agents that I could actually go and pop open. So show me all my references. So I've just started, like I said, this is only a couple of weeks old and I've just been laying it out. So I will typically lay the whole thing out. And then what I'll do is I'll start going through DevonThink, searching for terms that I found in my initial pass to find articles and references, for each one of these pieces. And again, I have the link that takes me right back to the original article so I can reference that.
Mhm.
And that's largely what I'm doing at the moment. And like I said, what this really solves for me is it gives me a very flexible canvas. It's flexible, but it also has structure. And that structure, as you pointed out, can be used to search and build and chain things together. That's the part I'm now learning about Tinderbox. And it's interesting. It's kind of baby steps. I think I had to get through being able to just build things and move things around and connect things. And then I'm hoping to expand out what I know about this in a variety of other ways.
Well, and again, my brain's racing as I think about this too, because what I've been working on lately is the output side. So I created a concept for myself as I wrap my head around Tinderbox called the 4 C's of knowledge management and exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And what I believe Tinderbox allows you to do is what you're demonstrating here: collect notes,
Mm-hmm.
curate those notes. You then start creating new insight, which leads to more collection and curation. And then when you're ready, you can then contribute, which is essentially publish. So I've been spending a lot of my time lately working on, export templates and output methodologies and strategies. And I actually yesterday, I built a stamp where with one button, I can publish an entire 100 notes completely compiled for publisher ready output.
Oh, we definitely need to talk.
Yeah, and then the other thing on that too, which I'm particularly excited based on what I saw you do there, is you started using your events, and obviously events have start times, end dates. I could see an application in your file wickedly cool using timeline, right? And because then you could actually use the and then you could break the timeline into bands, so you have buildings, designers, styles. Right. And you could actually show the timeline of when these, and use it from an analytical perspective too. And that when did this building start versus this design versus these designers, and you could start visually seeing which ones came first.
Oh, that's great, because timelines are hugely important in what
right. Yeah. And so the Tinderbox timeline, I think, is another kind of collaboration we can have off after this. Maybe we do another round. And we can talk about that offline and kind of experiment with that. But that was really fun. So I'm sorry I interrupted you though. Was there anything else for the?
No, that's essentially the way I'm using it, and it's like I said, it's so incredibly useful to just be able to, when you find something, get it into some structure that you can begin to see what the relationships might be and where it takes you. And I never know where it's going to take me, which is the great part about it.
Yeah, and it's super exciting. And the other thing on that note too, and just for our listeners, the one thing that I've kind of learned to do too is, trust in Tinderbox, trust in the process, trust in the community. And if you think, and for me, that's why I find the 4 C's of knowledge management kind of model really helpful in that. But if I trust in the process, when I'm in curation mode, I don't think about the other 3 steps.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm in create or collection mode, I don't think about the other 3 steps. When, and I especially don't think about the contribution phase, because I know, and I've gotten more adept at this, I know that I can get my output into any format that I want. Right. It can be a table, it can be a Word file, it can be a PowerPoint file, it can be any output I want. So I'm not distracted by how am I actually going to get this out? How am I actually going to manipulate this or transform this information to be able to present later, which then frees up my brain to be able to actually do my work.
No, that's actually the most important thing I think about, where, 20, 30 years ago, when the tools were really basic and new, you had to really know the technology, and you were really limited by what you could and couldn't do. And I think the beauty of exactly what you said was that it's about collecting, it's about working with the software to develop your ideas, your content, all the sorts of things you're doing. And Tinderbox doesn't limit you. I never have to, when I'm putting this down, I don't have to think about, well, will that work or not? Can I get it in or out? It's just a matter of it's really an amazingly liberating moment to just say, I found something, I know where I can put it, and I know how I can find it again, and I know how I can connect it to the other things I just found.
That's very cool. Well, thank you very much, Anthony. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm sure our listeners will likewise as well. And hopefully, we can do it again.
Well, thank you for having me, and I've learned a whole bunch of things, so now I'm excited.
All righty, sir. Well, we can continue forever. I should probably get back to work.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
All right,
All right.
all right, take
See ya.
care.
Thanks. Bye bye.